Welcome to Veterinary Compassion Project. I am Dr. Erin Holder, and it is my distinct honor to introduce today Sheva Carr, the founding CEO of Heart Ambassadors. Sheva is a doctor of Oriental Medicine, board certified Polarity Therapist, registered Polarity Educator, and expert HeartMath trainer and coach. Thank you so much, Sheva, for being here with us today.
What a
I
true pleasure. Thank you for
thank you. I
Mhm.
would love to jump in and just talk about one of my most favorite tools to use and something that I have enjoyed so much learning, which is HeartMath. And I would love for you to tell your story of how you came to find HeartMath. It's a great story.
Ah, well, it's getting longer and longer and longer. So actually, I have been collaborating with the HeartMath Institute now for 30 years. When I was 19, I jumped out of the frying pan of Ivy League theater schools in a very competitive environment into the fire of Nicaragua's civil war, working with street children in a street theater project. And so funny, I was texting with one of them last night, which kind of gives away the punchline that I just ended up falling in love with the 650,000 children orphaned by that civil war and living, many of them on the streets of Managua, in the nation's capital. And I felt so powerless as a 19-year-old to help them, but I loved them with my whole heart. And they taught me so much. But in 1989, during the change in power and what was deemed the country's first democratic election, I don't know how true that is, but the State Department and the Canadian government issued a command, really, that US and Canadian citizens leave the country because it was at high risk of civil unrest. And so I was listening to a Walkman. Now you're getting.
You've been aged.
I sure have. I was sitting on the back of a pickup truck being driven out of the country, listening to Tracy Chapman singing Talking About a Revolution, and literally watching these murals of the Nicaraguan Revolution being whitewashed on the drive out of the country. And I was broken. I was really broken in many ways. I had ideals about what was possible there that were being shattered. I was devastated to leave these orphaned children behind on the streets, knowing that was not going to be a good life for them. And I had what at the time was very severe undiagnosed post-traumatic stress. I had been living in an active combat zone for a year. I was kidnapped at gunpoint as a teenager in that war zone. And so I didn't know what I didn't know about my state of mind and body. And my PTSD manifested as very severe physical symptoms at first. So I came back with a plethora of physical ailments and was hospitalized in the Canadian healthcare system. PTSD was not a vogue diagnosis in the 80s, let's be clear. And, it's been an evolution for us to even define trauma and look at traumatic stress as something treatable. So, and certainly as something where there are somatic or physical consequences. And so that wasn't on anybody's radar when I was hospitalized in those days. They knew I'd been traveling in Central America's tropics, so they assumed I had some kind of tropical parasite or infectious disease, which it turned out I also had, but that wasn't the cause of my symptoms. And likely I was vulnerable to and susceptible to that because of the PTSD
Yeah,
and the compromise of
absolutely.
my immune system. And so I was run through the healthcare merry-go-round with all different kinds of specialists for every conceivable body part we have, and organ system, all looking for the unifying principle they couldn't find as specialists, which 8 years later, I
No.
discovered volunteering at this little research lab in Northern California called HeartMath. And I showed up on their doorstep when I was on spring break, actually, from getting my own master's degree in Oriental Medicine, and said, I'm here to volunteer. And they said, we don't take volunteers. I think they had to cook up some form for me to fill out. And a couple of days later, they called and said, all right, we found a job for you. And I was a pig in mud because the job they found for this young medical school student was to transcribe all their research.
Nice.
And it was sitting in that little closet-sized room, the headphones on, typing away, that for the first time I understood what had been going on with me for a decade. And it was trauma and stress. All my symptoms could be defined and described by post-trauma and stress. And beyond that, there were tools. There was science, scientifically validated tools that could change that for me. So I was one of those kiddos that needed to understand from my head that it was a good idea to go to my heart. And transcribing all that research convinced my head it was a good idea. And then I was motivated. I was like, okay, if these people that I just wrote about in this study could reduce their cortisol by 23% and increase their DHEA by 100%, just by doing these breathing and emotional activation techniques for 4 weeks, that's it. I'm doing it. I'm committed. And so that was very useful because I was willing to go on the ride of applying the tools without seeing changes right away, and really developing a whole new neurological and endocrinological baseline in my system. And it didn't even take that long. 2 weeks after beginning to practice HeartMath, I had been entered early menopause at 20 years old because of the impact
Whoa.
the stress hormones had had on my body. So I had amenorrhea. I wasn't menstruating for many years. Oh. 2 weeks after practicing HeartMath, I got my first period again, which means really the day I began practicing HeartMath, my endocrine system reset and reactivated itself. And many, many changes subsequent to that: mental, emotional, physical benefits, balancing. So that a few years later, I called HeartMath after starting my own personal practice as a physician, saying, you know what, this is the most beneficial thing I'm seeing for my patients. How can I help? I'll come lick stamps for you. I don't care, even though I'm allergic to stamps. So that probably wasn't going to happen. I would have done the sticker ones. I'll stamp mailings for you. It's totally aware. And they had more for me to do than licking stamps. Uh, they actually at the time licensed me to create a direct-to-consumer offering, which became Heart Mastery, and a whole now global community of people bringing heart to the world's sustainable development goals, among them species conservation, which and also SDG 3, health and wellness. So our community ended up being of great service to the medical community in particular, which led us to the veterinary world. And of course, one of the main things that I learned how to do that transformed my stress in that little box where I was transcribing was to transform the loss and the grief at being separated from the children I loved in that war zone, to love and gratitude that we had gotten to know each other at all. And so at night, after I learned HeartMath, I used to lay in the bathtub at the end of my day, just sending those kids love and imagining us all in a field, holding hands, reconnected. I never really believed that that was an actual possibility because I want to say it was Hurricane Mitch came through Nicaragua right after I left, devastating the towns, the little shanty towns where those kids lived. I had assumed most of them had either died in that hurricane or in the war, as they were easy conscripted for that Contra war, with no one to advocate for them. As it turned out, many of them did end up in prostitution to survive those years. But the love that I naturally had for them and eventually learned to send them to balance my own well-being actually got there and created some miracles. And among them, on Easter 2002, so 12 years later, 12 years almost to the day after I left Nicaragua, they came and found me again. They had, now in 1989, because probably a lot of people listening to this podcast don't know, I don't know, we did not have cell phones. Now little kids running around the streets of the world don't have shoes, but they do have cell phone technology. That was not the case in Nicaragua in 1989. We couldn't even get antibiotic soap, let alone, or antiseptic soap, let alone cell phone technology. And so they kept a little tiny loose leaf paper that was no more than this big, just a ripped out little piece of paper with my name and my Canadian phone number on it. And they kept that in their pocket, living on the streets, those kids, for 12 years. And one of them fell in love with an expat who was living in Ohio, and they got married. He brought her to Ohio, and the first thing she did was hand him that piece of paper and say, "We have to find her." So they tracked me down in my LA medical office from my old Canadian phone number through the internet. And as we were reunited, we created together because we saw the power of love. I had no idea. I thought I'd failed those children. And I'm sure many of you listening to this podcast can relate. Times when you felt you failed someone you love or an animal you love.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know until we do that the love itself is the success. And it has impact far beyond what we can measure, but now we can actually start to measure through HeartMath's research, which is very exciting. I had no idea that just loving those kids saved their lives in a way. They held the love we shared as the light guiding their process through their lives. One of them became a psychologist, started an orphanage, and had a daughter named after me when we found each other.
Oh, you showed them the possibilities.
Well, they showed me the possibilities too. It's a kinship. It's a mutuality, as love always is. It's not a savior rescuer model. And that's one of the reasons we're suicidal as healthcare practitioners, because we think it's our job to save and rescue. And it's only our job to synchronize with love, to love and be loved. It's mutual. There's a mutuality to it. We save each other. And when we allow the entrance into that mutuality of love, well, that's where the magic and the miracles happen. And those kids grew up under the light of that loving connection that we had. and became amazing for this world and inspired me to what's possible. And so we started this nonprofit together, and that was really about the power of love that HeartMath can measure now and give us science. So we don't just sound like, I don't know, like crazy people standing on a soapbox, but we can walk into it, a busy emergency room and explain to the physicians there neurophysiologically how if they love and care for their patients, it helps the outcomes. And so here we are.
Oh, so beautifully said. I could hear that story many, many times. I love hearing that story. I love knowing that it brought you to us, to the veterinary community. I'm so thrilled to have you be a part of it. So I'm going to take just a right turn for a moment before we come back to, because I really want to hear about like exactly what we're doing with HeartMath. But before we do that, can you tell me about your relationship with your animals?
Mm,
I know you have some pets.
yes. Does this let me screen share? I think it will. Well, let's see. There we go.
Ah,
This is Ami and Argy.
beautiful.
Although I would have to say, I never say I have pets because we all know they have me.
Yes. That's so true.
And that is most definitely true of Ami and Urji. Um, and we also live in the redwood forest. There's the husband who he's part of the story, by the way, of finding HeartMath, which I'll share in a second. But we live in this massive forest with giant trees. And so
Ah,
um, I really see the whole ecosystem here as part of the pets that have me. We have
mm,
over 22 species of birds that live in our backyard that we feed with hummingbird feeders and bird feeders of different varieties. And um, when I was a child, I saved my allowance for 3 years to get a bird. And I got all the accoutrements. I got this gorgeous um, kind of ornate cage and all of the things a bird would need. And when the day came that I had saved enough to go get the bird, I couldn't do it because I could not imagine putting a bird in a cage.
mm,
It suddenly the reality of what it meant hit me and I
mhm.
couldn't do it. So I gave all that stuff away. And now I have these incredible, we have 3 or 4 species of birds that nest in around our house.
Oh,
So that's kind of a childhood dream that's come true. And we actually, I co-taught a class using HeartMath as a method to access animal communication for some veterinarians, but also just people who love animals and live with
mhm,
animals and want to have a better relationship with animals and learn how to communicate with them in their language. Because the heart is the connection to nonverbal communication. All communication ultimately is nonverbal. Words only make up somewhere between 4 to 7% of communication. It's all energetic, and animals are very available for energetic communication. It's the tone of voice, it's the body language, but it's really
mm,
the emotionality and the energy, which we can measure at HeartMath in your heart rhythm and a spectral analysis of the electromagnetic field of the heart. There's emotions and frequencies being communicated in those fields. That was 75, 80% accuracy. We can interpret through spectral analysis. Well, animals don't need devices to interpret that. They feel it directly.
mm.
And we can learn to reconnect to feeling that directly in each other. And of course, with our animals. So we have that direct communication. So I cherish the animals that have me, and boy, do they ever. They got me.
Yes. It's so true. As I'm sitting here, I'm just laughing because my beloved horse, we're redoing our entire acreage to prepare this track system for him. And yes, they have us. We do as they wish. So tell me about actually HeartMath. What is this?
Hmm.
What is this tool?
So HeartMath began as a research institute in Northern California. And their first seminal paper, and I'm looking here for a graph that will convey this, because as we say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Their first seminal research was published in the American Journal of Cardiology in 1995. And this was the core of the publication. HeartMath discovered that emotions affect heart rhythms and heart rhythms affect emotions. And that reciprocal relationship between emotions and heart rhythm patterns changes over 1,400 things in our bodies and our brains. So for those who can't see the screen, what we're looking at is on the left side, a very chaotic, herky-jerky, sort of like Rocky Mountain peaks. On the right side, we see the smooth, even rolling hills and valley, coherent sine curve. And what these are is a picture of heart rhythm patterns. So not heartbeats. This is not an EKG. If it were, they'd be very undesirable. We'd have VTAC or AFib. It's not an EKG. It's heart rate variability. It's the beat-to-beat changes in the heart's rhythm, how the heart accelerates a little and decelerates a little. Speeds up, slows down, speeds up, slows down. When that's a herky-jerky ride, it's like driving with one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake on your car, and you don't know if you're coming or going. You're burning through your brake pads and your transmission and a lot of fuel, and you smell burnt rubber and you're not getting anywhere. That's everyday run-of-the-mill stress in our autonomic nervous system. And that everyday run-of-the-mill stress could seem innocent enough, but it's putting a lot of wear and tear on us mentally, emotionally, and physically. It's aging us quickly. And it's leading to not just an early end of life, but a continuously poor quality of life that leads us to want an early end to life. And that all can change in a heartbeat. Literally and figuratively, in the trace we're looking at here. And probably the most efficient thing to do, or the most fun thing to do, is just do it. So this person sitting in a chair just remembered something that made them frustrated. By the way, they weren't in the midst of it. They were sitting in a chair in the lab and invited to remember something that pissed them off. Just putting their attention on it and remembering it caused this chaos in the heart rhythm pattern, which is an average person's normal baseline, by the way. Chaos in the heart rhythm pattern. And that leads to those 1,400 changes neurophysiologically that take us from Technicolor Oz to black and white Tornado, Kansas. To get back to Technicolor Oz, what this person did in the chair that we could do together now is a quick coherence technique. So let's just focus attention in the area around the heart, the chest area. Imagine the breath is flowing in through the heart and out through the heart. Breathing a little slower, a little deeper than usual. To hack into the survival mode of flight, fight, freeze, appease that an incoherent heart rhythm triggers. I invite you to play with making the inhale and the exhale even in length as you breathe while focusing attention in the area around the chest. And with that heart-focused breathing, if you find it helpful, you can count as you breathe in and count the same number of counts as you breathe out. And with that heart-focused breathing, I invite you to activate feeling of gratitude or compassion. This is the Veterinary Compassion Project. Compassion for yourself, your colleagues, your patients. Or a feeling of gratitude for someone or something, an animal you love, a person you love, a place you love. Whatever it is, breathe that feeling in through the heart. And out through the heart. Erin, as you do that now, do you notice any changes in your body, emotions, or thoughts?
Oh, it just, I mean, when I do this, I smile. I just involuntarily smile. And immediately my heart rate drops. I feel so relaxed, and it happens so quickly, just in moments after I start. It's so beautiful.
So you just self-regulated 1,400 things in your physiology. And your heart rhythm looks more like the blue line. And that coherence then facilitates brain changes that change how we're perceiving situations around us and responding to them. But when it comes to veterinary care, it also allows us to entrain our heart rhythms with our patients. So yes, this crosses species. This is the son of our director of research at HeartMath, and this was the HeartMath dog Mabel. And Josh and Mabel had a deep bond, as you can see. And they did an experiment where they hooked both Josh and Mabel to heart rate variability monitors. Mabel, of course, was never allowed in the laboratory. There's a lot of things to break in there. And so they actually let Mabel into the lab. Josh was in a separate room, and you can see she's going all over the place. Her heart is like 240 beats per minute. Like, ooh, sniffing here and there. And wow, I never get to come in here. And then Josh enters the room, and he sits in a chair in that room. He's instructed not to touch or interact with Mabel, just to radiate love to her. And even with the excitement of being in the lab for the first time, look what happens to Mabel's heart rhythm. She and Josh get in sync. So that idea, two hearts that beat as one, is more than just a poetic song lyric. It's actual. And we've looked at this in horses and humans and other species. Our hearts synchronize when we are in that love exchange. And then when Josh got up to leave, Mabel ran to the door and started scratching at it, and her heart jacked up to 240 beats per minute again. But look, she's way down here at an average of 120 beats per minute. In this very coherent, synchronized with Josh, we could overlay these heart rhythms on each other. And that synchronization of heart rhythm is very meaningful when it comes to being able to sense, as veterinarians and lovers of all life, what these beings who don't speak in our language to us the way you and I are talking with each other now. I'm doing most of the talking today, though, I have to say. I'm going to be quiet.
I'm enjoying it. Please continue.
That's very generous. They did a study on mothers and babies, so babies also nonverbal. And I mean, you've heard of mother's intuition. I don't know. Are you a mom, Erin, to more than a
I,
horse?
I I am a mom of four children. Yes,
Do you have an experience of mother's intuition?
absolutely.
Well, this is some scientific validation of that. What they found, and this is to me is quite interesting, and especially given how we have to operate in a modern healthcare environment where we're pulled by so much technology and so many continuous distracting elements and nonstop changes in focus. What they found is that mothers who were attentive to their babies, so they weren't touching, that's important because it wasn't through skin conductivity, just like Josh and Mabel, the mothers were just radiating love to their babies. And what happened is they were both hooked up to EEGs, measuring brain patterns and heart rhythms, HRV. The baby's heart rhythm registers in the mother's brainwave pattern, but only when she's giving attention to the baby, attentive. If that mother was on her phone, didn't happen. So when I train healthcare workers of all kinds, because it's like, what is the source of this mother's intuition that I just know what's going on with this baby? I can feel the difference between a colic cry or I have an ear infection cry or a hungry cry or a sleepy, I'm tired and need to go down for a nap cry. How does a mom have those things, that knowledge, that knowing, that intuitive connection? They care. And that care gets the heart rhythm synchronized, and the heart rhythm can then pick up on that other being's system. And we can do that in veterinary care also.
We do. In fact, I talk about it, and I think most of the veterinarians and staff members listening don't even realize that they're doing that when they go into the exam room and bring their intention into the exam room with the animal, and they're fully present and not thinking about the patient that they just saw or the patient that they have to see in a few minutes, but walking into the exam room and being fully present. So I love that. I
So
love that you brought that up.
I mean, some of the veterinarians that I work with, the thing I hear the most distressing, and that might be the rural area where we live, I don't know, is when people come and bring a perfectly healthy animal and ask the vet to put them down. And
Oh,
then you've got that burden of how you're going to respond to that weighing on you as this background stress that then intervenes in that sacred, beautiful experience we got into this for.
yeah.
Of that loving nonverbal communication and the magic that happens when we're in that space. And HeartMath just becomes a way, whatever the stressor, maybe it's not that one for you, maybe it's getting audited
There's so many.
or like
Take a pick.
we all have them, whether we work in veterinary care or not.
Absolutely.
But HeartMath gives us a way, a place to give those stressors so we don't give up in the stress, the magic that life can be about and why we got into what we do in the first place.
And one thing that you said in listening to your wonderful presentation for healthcare workers that really resonated with me was that we often go into our jobs in our life with no reserve. And what HeartMath can do for us is to fill up our reserve so that when we go through these emotional crises that we're all going to go through, we're not we're not operating on empty. So can you speak to that for just a moment?
Absolutely. And maybe if I can share the whiteboard for a moment, we'll just look at kind of the logic of this. Oh, it's giving me some options. Zoom got all fancy on me. Um, well, let me just show this grid. Oh, is that working? Can you guys see this?
Yes.
So this is a whole grid of the autonomic nervous system mapped against our hormonal pathways. So we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic system. Heart rhythm patterns are determining whether that system is this herky-jerky ride or that even smooth finesse of the gas and the brakes of our body-mind. And that changes the hormones we release, and it's all driven by emotion. So now if you look at this grid, Erin, and you see the incoherent heart rhythm pattern in the red and the coherent heart rhythm pattern in the green, even though the green is a fatter ink, which one took more fuel?
Oh, the red, no question.
Which one went further?
Exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. We're burning a lot of energy inefficiently.
Mm.
But which one went further across the Zoom page?
It definitely looks like the green is going further.
With less fuel.
Yes.
And here's another cool thing. When we run our energy that way, it's like my Toyota Prius. We're recharging our battery on the move. Because care is like oil for the human system or fuel. It refuels us in progress, not when we overcare, when we care so much that we're throwing ourselves out of balance and in stress. But when we care, and we probably all know this, I mean, you've probably been called to an emergency or exhausted, you're thinking, oh, there's no way I can do one more thing today. And then you get yourself there, and suddenly the patient's in front of you and you care so much about them, you get like this second wind.
Mm-hmm.
That's the coherence driving the hormonal system and all these other things working in synchronization inside you to optimize your system and refuel you on the move. And we can learn to tap into that deliberately, not just by serendipity, by applying these really simple skills. As you saw, quick coherence took, well, now that you know it, you could do it in about 30 seconds while you're washing your hands between patients. That's when a lot of healthcare workers do it. And that recharges your own internal battery. And when we're managing our own energy expenditures, tracking where we're going on this visual map you see, catching ourselves when we travel into that zone where we're draining our life force and making a quick adjustment, a little reset. Oh, let me come out of my survival mode. Just because the IRS is auditing me doesn't mean that unlike my patients, biting the auditor is not going to be the way to solve for this. So I can afford to let go of this jaw tension because all it's doing is giving me TMJ and a toothache, and I can let that go so I have more energy to enjoy my patients today. It's like really that gritty simple. The energy we can serve from releasing that tension periodically throughout the day in a little moment like a heart-focused breathing or a quick coherence. It accrues fast into stored vitality. And that stored vitality then gives us energy to enjoy life, which gives us more vitality, and we get in this virtuous spiral where things get better and better.
Well, I mean, you said it perfectly. And I think it just warrants even just repeating that if we can just not be focused and living in the fight or flight, we can have so much more energy at the end of the day. Because I can think back when I was in practice and I can think of moments where, man, I wish I had this tool on the floor. You have a technician who says, this client's mad, or there's a staff member that needs you, it's an emergency, or you've got a sick and dying animal, And we're just constantly just on these horrible roller coasters in veterinary medicine. Genuinely, I don't, there's not a lot of veterinarians who aren't on, technicians, any staff member who's not on that path. Even the front desk who's answering the calls and dealing with, just everyone in the building. And so to have this tool to be able to just instantly bring down your heart rate and preserve your energy so that at the end of the day, you don't walk into your own home depleted and don't have time, or you're exhausted and you can't interact with your animals in the way that you want to, or your children or your husband. So thank you so very much.
Husband or children and husband, or aren't they the animals also? No, mine.
So innocent over there in the corner.
He's sending you all heart. That's what he's doing.
Good. I feel it. Thank you.
So I promised I would share the husband piece, right? He's actually
Yes, please do.
HeartMath, because there I was for 8 years, suffering with undiagnosed PTSD. And I was taking a class in graduate school, and we just shared this with a friend of ours yesterday, that he showed up late, and she said, that's so on brand for him. So there was only one chair left in the class, and it was next to me. And he sat in it. And because of the way those heart fields communicate, obviously the teacher was already talking when he walked in, but when Robert sat down, I felt peace. And it bewildered me, because I hadn't felt peace for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I felt peace when he sat down next to me. And I was like, whatever that dude has ordered off the cosmic menu, I want some. And he went to work at HeartMath a couple months later. It was him that I came to visit, and that's why I showed up on their doorstep and said, I'm here to volunteer. I want to know, how did that happen? How did I feel peace sitting next to him? His coherent heart got mine in sync just by being in proximity to each other. So it's amazing when we're able to self-regulate our heart rhythms, even with all of those, that wild amount of stress you described that goes on in a veterinary clinic. When we're able to synchronize how we become that ripple effect of influence through the whole clinic, and of course for our distressed patients.
And how beautiful to be able to synchronize with our clients who are worried, who are scared, to be able to help them if we just bring our attention to them. So I love that so much. And I'm very excited. I'll put a plug in now for our retreat that we're hosting in April in Petaluma, that we're going to have a HeartMath representative with us to teach us more about HeartMath, and we're going to practice it, and we're going to be able to take it back into our clinics, and we'll be able to teach people more about it. So I'm very thankful and very excited that we can work together to help the veterinary community out there in desperate need of help.
Yes, and our HeartMath trainer that's joining you there is a Kaiser Permanente nurse leader who learned HeartMath before COVID and brought her teams through COVID using HeartMath.
Wow.
In Kaiser Permanente. So she'll have some wonderful stories to share about how these skills can really be a rubber that meets the road when it's needed in a hot crisis.
And just every facet of life, and to be able to have tools, because as I was suffering through compassion fatigue and burnout and trying to find ways to help myself, there's just not a lot of published information in the veterinary community. There's a ton of information out in the world that can be gathered up just like HeartMath and used if it resonates with you. And so the goal of our project is to bring all of the potential tools together to find out what feels right, what resonates with you, and how can you move forward and deal with a very traumatic job. I mean, our profession sadly creates trauma, and most often we have trauma in our in our history that we haven't perhaps dealt with. And so we're re-traumatized at work. And so our goal is to just bring all these tools together to have this beautiful space in Petaluma, but not necessarily just in that space. We're offering online space as well in our monthly support group. So anyway, that's us. And we're overjoyed to be connected with you, Sheva, and HeartMath in general. And yeah, so I think.
I feel moved to just share one quick story of
Yes.
how much magic can happen when you just add a little bit of heart to what is already going on. My orange tabby, Mr. Gingy, lived with me for 20 years. And when he was 15, he almost died of acute pancreatitis. And we brought him into a veterinary clinic under very stressful conditions for us and the clinic. He was inpatient for a while, and they were amazing. And he survived that and lived another 5 raucous years in our forest with us. And through that process, I was so grateful, but also so curious, because obviously to save him from his pancreatitis with inpatient care cost many thousands of dollars, as all of you who work in veterinary care would know. And thankfully, I had created a savings account for Gingy when he was a kitten. I got him when he was 6 weeks old. So I had some money saved for his elder care years. But I asked our vet, who was obviously phenomenal and pulled out all the stops to save his life, how the other folks living in our tiny mountain town would have been able to handle such a thing. And she shared really vulnerably the devastating fact that most wouldn't and would have had to put him down. And that crushed me, because Gingy saw me through my healing of my own trauma, as I'm sure for many of you, your 4-legged and furry friends and feathered friends do. I could not fathom allowing such a thing to happen. And then we got to hear this story because we were in this vulnerable heart sharing with each other, that when Dr. Garrity, our veterinary clinic doctor, had started her practice decades ago, there was a huge wildfire the year she started her practice. And she right away jumped in and was treating the wild animals in our forest, mountain lions and deer and rabbits and bobcats and raccoons and foxes who were injured in the fire. There was one house cat named Max who lost his ears and his paws in the fire that she treated, and no one ever came to claim him. So Max sat on the counter in their check-in area and was like the healer cat for all the animals that came in, and would just purr and radiate this heart field from his perch on the counter. And that was his mission in life. And there was a jar next to Max called Max's Fund, where people with extra could put money to help care for the wildfire animals, or could help care for animals whose parents and families couldn't afford their veterinary care. And the IRS came in and shut down Max's Fund because they said, you're a veterinary clinic or a for-profit company, you can't take donations. And as Dr. Garrity and I were having this conversation and remembering the kids in Nicaragua, I said, well, we have a nonprofit. So we've resurrected Max's Fund, and we've helped many animals in our.
Thank you.
So it's not a jar on her counter anymore. It's a legit 501c3 and tax deductible. But for some reason, I wanted to share that story, that when, there was a heart connection. She runs a massively busy veterinary practice. It was not reasonable that we had time to have this conversation. the conversation happened because one of my students, she might be listening here on the phone, Elizabeth created a slogan that we live by at our Heart Ambassador community: space for grace.
Mm.
When we just take that moment to pause in the heart, as I did with Dr. Garrity that day, I was breathing gratitude to them that they saved Gingy's life, but also compassion. There's your word, Erin. You know, compassion is one of the highest frequencies we can measure. Not the kind of compassion that drains you. That's overcare. The real deal fuels us. That compassion for people who couldn't afford veterinary care opened a space for grace where we could have this dialogue. It took us 10 minutes. And as a result, many, many animals have been helped, healed, and saved that would have been put down otherwise. So just I encourage everyone listening to this podcast, whether you work in veterinary medicine or not, just take a moment each day somewhere to focus in the heart and open a space for grace. You never know what miracles you and life will cook up together.
Absolutely. Space for grace. That is beautiful.
Well, I definitely feel like our meeting each other, Erin, has been a space of grace, and I look forward to whatever we continue to unfold together.
Me too. Me too. I'm full of gratitude and certainly able to take any questions if anybody's got any questions or any thoughts on your call.
Thank you. Yes. So we haven't told your podcast listeners, but we have a live audience here with us today. This is the community of heart ambassadors that came together to practice HeartMath and other modalities in service to these big issues around the world. And we meet every day as a community and send heart to the world together. And so they're here sending heart to veterinary medicine and those who work in it. Is there anyone here live on the Heart Start call who has a question for Erin or for me in this moment this morning? Or something you'd like to share? Can you guys all still hear us okay?
I'll share.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Michael.
Oh, it's remarkable. I heard Erin share that. Sorry. Oh, what was that? You did that? Hey, who was that? Were you there? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I turned on. What?
Are you okay, Michael?
Yeah. I wasn't sure if I could. But anyway, we're back on. And just to, tell Erin, I have a horse. And Jan's is probably not on the call, but she has a horse. And we work HeartMath for the horses. And I have no background in equestrian, but it just, but through Heart Ambassadors, actually, I started using the practices with my horse, and it was remarkable. Over the top remarkable. I just wanted to share that, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, for sure. They have a giant heart fields. It's very easy to get into their heart space right away. It's so lovely.
Yeah.
I was told the horse's heart is 10 times the size of the human heart. Is that correct?
It's very big, yes. Depending on the size of the horse, it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whales even bigger. Whales have hearts the size of rooms we could all have dinner in. And I had the incredible privilege of being in the water with a whale. It happened spontaneously. And that whale sang to me for I don't know how long. But after that, I was with a retreat that I was running. We all drove back to our Airbnb where we were hosting the retreat, and we slept for 26 hours after being in that heart field of that whale.
Wow.
Very, very, very powerful. So, and my experience, Michael, I don't know, or Erin, if you experience this with your horses, but there's a delight I witness in animals when they see someone is onto this terrain and domain of nonverbal connection and communication. It's like if you drop into the heart and just meet them there, it's like, oh, someone got the secret.
Yeah.
And they'll respond. They're like so excited. I mean, it really moves me emotionally when that happens. It reminds me of the scene in the film about Helen Keller when she's with Annie Sullivan at the well and discovers that things have names, words. And that moment of connection, like there's language we can have with each other. And I see that recognition in animals when it's like we discover not only do things have names and words, but there's this whole playground of energy that goes beyond language and words where we connect, a whole dimension of reality that for us to play in. And they're like, oh, someone came to play.
I love that. Yes, for sure.
Just waiting. And it's with all living things.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some really meaningful conversations with trees, and HeartMath has some incredible research actually on tree communication, how they communicate with each other, and how we as humans could learn to eavesdrop on their communications because trees notify each other in advance of earthquakes. And so we're looking at how humanity can learn from that, and for disaster preparedness and all kinds of really practical applications, not just the fun of having a more dimensional life.
Absolutely.
Anyone else here have? Yes, please go ahead, Vajra.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I really appreciate you guys and Sheva. And I have a question around what is pushing the suicide rate for veterinarians? Like, is it the fact that there's so much work and it's just overwhelming? Or I'm very curious about that piece.
Yeah.
That's a really good question because most people are very surprised to hear that about veterinarians because we are getting to be around animals our whole life, and what could be more wonderful than that? And so that's often what I hear. But the reality of veterinary medicine is wonderful schooling in veterinary medicine, but a lack of schooling in actually how to have these relationships with humans. You know, we go into veterinary medicine because we love animals, but the reality is that there's an enormous amount of interactions with the owners, the staff. We get almost no financial advising in school. We get very little in management styles, and we're put into a world where, you know, unlike a human doctor who typically focuses on one area, we are the dentist, the radiologist, we're the internist, the surgeon. So, and this is after 4 years of schooling, and couple that with the fact that we are now in a crisis. There's not enough of us, and this is a real problem. And we also have a culture problem in veterinary medicine where the old school veterinarians push and push, and there's a lack of bringing balance into the hospital and balance into people's lives. So there's just, it's not one thing. It's not, you know, that we have to intentionally end a life, which is very difficult for us. It is a culmination of many different things, creating this traumatic environment that we work in every day, and then often coming into this not understanding that it can be traumatic, and and having our own traumas that we haven't processed that could be reignited when we're in the work field. There's just many different layers of why this profession is so difficult and why the suicide rate is so high. I hope that answered your question.
Yes. that was super helpful. And so how do you see, I mean, I haven't gone to your website, so I can do some research and I will afterwards, but
Thanks.
what do you see is like a pathway forward to more balance for veterinarians? I mean, I know HeartMath is going to be a big piece, but do you see another big factor that needs to be present?
Yeah. I think the first thing that we have to do is what we're doing. So this couldn't be a more appropriate time and space for the creation of Veterinary Compassion Project is talk about it. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about it in vet school. We need to provide tools in vet school so that, you know, not anticipating that people are going to have compassion fatigue and burnout, although the statistics are very bleak for the veterinary community. I think a veterinary nurse lasts about 5 years in the profession. But if we're talking about it early, if we're holding space for this, for people to come to, I think it may ignite a ripple effect in this country, perhaps in other countries where we're removing the stigma of it, where our clients are understanding that when they bring their animal to the veterinarian, that, you know, uh, you know, the plight of the veterinarian and the veterinary staff. I think it's genuinely a beautiful thing when the owners can understand that. So it's a difficult path. I mean, it's a really difficult path forward. And there's some days where I think, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to, you know, help all these people? But we have to start somewhere and we just need to talk about it to as many people as I can talk about it. And so I try to go on different podcasts and talk as much as possible just to get at least the knowledge out there so that veterinarians tend to be loners in a lot of ways. It's very difficult to get into vet school. And we work so hard to get into vet school that we feel like we have to do everything on our own. And we get out and we start our clinics and we've got to do it all. We've got to solve the problems. And we put up this wall like, we're okay. We're okay. We don't need help. And that leads to an inability to say, hey, I'm not actually okay. And I do need help. And we feel weak and insignificant if we do admit this to other people. So if there are wonderful people out there talking about it, then maybe people can say, hey, me too. I want to join.
There's so much
Love that.
intersectionality between the stressors driving suicide in veterinary medicine and the stressors driving suicide in human medicine. Erin, you talked about the education process and understand that in veterinary medicine and allopathic human medicine, people have to be high academic achievers to get into programs in the first place. And so the prerequisites for having academic achievement and then also having a connection to animals don't set people up for the kind of management skills and human interactions they have to have in running or working in a clinic environment. And that puts huge pressures on people because they were striving to attain high grades in math and science, not in social skills.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And those social skills are really, really necessary to mitigate stress. But the other piece that I hear in veterinary medicine and human medicine, but in a different way, in veterinary medicine, I think it's more accelerated actually, is the corporate takeover of small veterinary practices. And the privatization that leads to, so when by privatization, I don't mean private practice, I mean the corporate sector creating these standardized methods of caring that require quotas for numbers of treatments and quotas for and how you respond. And we see this in human medicine as well, but it's playing out slightly differently. So the profiteering model where medicine has become a profit sector, a business for profit, has driven business models in medicine that create moral injury and values conflicts. It's impossible for it not to happen.
Yeah.
Where then what happens is the physicians are answering to two different drummers. Because what is in the best interest of the patient isn't always what is in the best interest of the business. And
yeah,
that's
just such an important part of where we are now in veterinary medicine, with a huge portion of veterinary hospitals being sold to corporate, in my opinion, because the veterinarians are tired. They don't have resources to help them run the clinic. This is exactly what happened to me. I don't, by the time I sold my practice, I'm a 7-doctor practice with 50 employees. And despite hiring a consulting group, which really did help me, and, I hired a financial consultant way too late, and trying to figure out how to hire the correct hospital manager. So this has led to this wide open door for corporations to come in and take over veterinary practices. And so what's going to happen, I believe, from my heart, is that we are going to swing back and away from that, because we are going to find that it is not, sadly, the best care that you can receive for your animal, or the best environment for the staff. And so we're going to have veterinarians who say, I didn't want to own a practice before, but now I think I'm going to step away from corporate and I'm going to open up my practice. And if we can give them these tools to survive and to say, I cannot do it alone, I need to have somebody who advises me. I need to have these tools of HeartMath or trauma work or whatever else we're going to use, then these veterinarians can stay in owning their practice so much longer, and they can go all the way and not feel like I have to walk away to save myself.
And part of that in both human medicine and veterinary medicine is requiring us as physicians to relearn our practice, because what's happened is it's become so technology based that as physicians and veterinarians, we can't afford the overhead it takes to run a highly technological clinic. Just some of the machines alone, or bringing in mobile versions of them, cost so much money. And then what you have is this vicious spiral going on where corporate acquires these businesses and then boosts out their technology. It's all designed to make a profit, and that drives up the costs higher, so that an individual practitioner that wants to work out of their van can't afford the cost of those things. And what's going to happen, Vajra, in answer to your question, exactly as Erin is saying, is people and animals are longing for the capacity to remake that living connection. We're going to find, I believe, based on the research I'm seeing even from HeartMath and our work in healthcare for 3 decades, there are things that a human to human or human to animal interaction can achieve that no robot or technology can. And we're going to have to relearn as physicians, how do you take a temperature without a digital thermometer? How do you take a blood pressure manually without all this digital equipment? Most of us trained now don't even know how to do those things. But when I lived in the streets of Nicaragua, I took care of those kids. I wanted to learn street medicine. How can I help these kids on the streets survive when we don't have access to antibiotics? And that's why I studied Chinese medicine. And there's healing that can occur through that living heart-to-heart connection that cannot occur any other way. And as the technology reaches its pinnacle and we see the limits of what it can do, we'll come back to that. And that will create a saner world that brings healing for all sides of its equation.
I agree completely.
It's a great question, Vajra, and many people don't know that veterinary suicide is among the highest in the world. And one of the reasons cited that I saw when I did research on it is also because veterinarians have access to euthanizing drugs. So they have access to make that choice, where others may not have it as readily available. And there's all kinds of theories about how to prevent that from happening. But I would say this, whenever I work with anyone who's suicidal, as I was when I came back from the war zone that I lived in, the desire to die is the fight-flight response that was designed to keep us alive, now turning against us in wanting to get us out of pain by fleeing life itself. It's an act of self-love always. It's a desire to feel better in a dynamic where we feel bad. And as Sogyal Rinpoche, who translated the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, said to me when I was 19, I had the privilege of meeting him when I got back from Nicaragua. And he must have sensed I was suicidal. And he said to me, committing suicide is trying to create an emotional and psychological change through a physical change. And it won't work. Because when you drop your body, your emotions amplify. That's what he said to me. Whether it was true or not, it talked me into staying in my body the 8 years it took to find what could heal me. And so now when I provide suicide interventions for people, and when I talk to people through a suicide hotline or through the hospital that's referred them, always we get to a place where what they're seeking isn't to die, but to feel better.
Absolutely.
They feel like they're in a room that has no windows and doors. And when we drop into the heart, it opens the aperture of our awareness where we can see windows and doors or even create them where they weren't before. Vajra, I'm sorry, you were trying to say something.
I just wanted to add to that, like just kind of circling in the conversation, and that, you know, like when we don't feel alone, I think that's what you're speaking to, right? When we know there's windows and there's people outside the windows that are smiling at us, going, "Hi, you're okay." You know, that I think that's what I'm hearing you say around the suicide and how to prevent that.
Certainly isolation can be a part of it for some people, though I will say there are people who are surrounded by family and friends who don't feel connected to them. And so it's more about getting connected to our own hearts, not about that becomes the vehicle by which we can connect to others.
Got it.
And then isolation can be needed solitude for regeneration. Everything becomes your ally.
Yeah. I guess this is like really like kind of top on my heart right now, because I just did have a conversation with a veterinarian in Sacramento, and she's interested in HeartMath. And I asked her the same question about, you know, why is there so much suicide? And from her perspective, she shared that, you know, a lot of what happens for her is that, I think it's okay. I hope it's okay. I'm sharing this kind of in a, you know, non-descriptive way of who she is, but that it's the stress of people coming with their animals and not having enough money to get their care. And I think we touched on this earlier on with the Max story.
That's why we created Max's Fund.
Wanted to share that.
So you can tell her about Max's Fund, and
please tell her about Veterinary Compassion Project when you can. Tell as many people as you can. We're new We have to get the word out there, and we're just relying on beautiful people like you guys to say, hey, have you heard of this project? And we have a beautiful online presence where we're going to connect many people to different healing modalities. So please, please tell everybody you can about Veterinary Compassion Project.
I think you muted Vajra, did you?
Yes, I will. And just so grateful for the service that you're providing for all of us and the healing. It just makes my heart so happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your care and your compassion, Vajra.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
What a rich time together. I wonder if we might all take a moment as a community to refocus our attention on the heart, and in honor of the Veterinary Compassion Project, to just radiate our compassion to those for whom their fight-flight has turned into fighting themselves and fleeing from their own lives in suicidal ideation, or just that even the contemplation of the possibility to know that there's a way to feel better without leaving, and to radiate our compassionate care. We've all been there in places where maybe not suicidal, but we've all been in moments where it looks like we're in a room with no windows and no doors. And to radiate compassion to that, knowing the way can open. And just breathe our love, our care, our compassion to veterinarians, vet techs, front office staff, and those who love animals, who are also confronted with the stress of a veterinary care environment when they can't afford to pay for their care. And send our love and care to all of that. That those who need this conversation find their way to it. Thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you so much, Sheva. Thank you to your listeners. Thank you to my listeners. Thank you so very much.
I know that you learned about HeartMath by watching one of our micro learnings that we give continuing education credit to workers. And so for anyone watching this podcast who would like access to that, Erin referenced that training earlier, we're happy to make that available as a gift to your community.
And we will definitely be working with HeartMath to post something for our veterinary community where that's in the works.
Is there anything else that you need today, Dr. Erin, or anyone else who's live on our live playing out there in the phone fields? There they are. Anything you guys would like to share or ask to be complete? Well, may this time together open a space for grace for those in need. Thank you so much, Erin. Much love.
Thank you.